So just to recap, we learned that we want to use Python virtual environments to help manage our project dependencies. And we basically want to create a virtual environment per project. And that ends up with a project directory structure, something like this, where we have our project root and we have the project, the whole project directory, and then Django makes that little Django project directory. And we also have these apps, and we only really need one right now. But then we end up with our project root, the virtual environment directory, which we probably want to name .venv, the directory that has sort of the metadata about the whole Django project and the sort of initial setup. And then for each app that we create, there will be its own directory, and then we have manage py. And finally, we learned that a little bit of how Django connects to Postgres. We use the psychopg2 library, and we create migrations. And then we run and apply those migrations against the database. And we actually have this wonderful slide here, just to reiterate the relationship here between a model file and a table in SQL, where we have our model here on the right, and Django models. This is a whole thing called object relational mapping. And pretty much what it sounds like, it maps objects to tables and sort of tracks those relationships. So we can do that in a nice object-oriented style. So on that note, let me stop my share. And let me think, I'll pause the recording unless do people have like a burning yen for team demos to be recorded? Okay, so we've seen Django models. The term you'll also hear is Django ORM, which stands for Object Relational Mapper. Which again, we're mapping objects to tables, really, in relationships. And you'll hear those terms interchangeably, Django models or Django ORM. And we've seen these fields, right? And if I go to my VS Code, you all have added much more than me now with the students, but with the Pokemon, we can see these fields. And as we discovered too, we get really good autocomplete from VS Code that gives us way more information than we'd ever want to know. And we're using these classes that Django gives us to create like these instances of fields to build up these model classes, right? So we're composing classes. We're using classes and class instances to help build other classes. And this represents a Pokemon in Django. And it's not the worst to think about, right, entities as being a little more abstract, because we now have the model, and then we have the migrations that actually construct the SQL queries, right? And if I go into pSQL, I can see my table. But now there's that extra layer, right? It's almost like this is like the physical layer of the data model that we don't have to care about as much, or that we don't explicitly design. And something useful to know here too is the way that migrations work is, let me just go ahead, in fact, and open these up in order so we can see. Django runs these in order based by name every time, and it checks if a migration has run already or not. And it's not a linked list, but you can think of it as very similar to one. It runs one migration. It runs this initial migration that creates our Pokemon with these fields. And then on top of that, it runs another. And this should remind you a little bit maybe of Git commits as well, of one thing on top of another, on top of another. And this one on top of that one. right? So what I end up here is with, ID, and the Pokemon has a level, and the Pokemon is in a stable or not, and the Pokemon has a name. But this was constructed by running this first migration, running this second one, and running this third one on top of each other. And so one migration kind of leads to the next, and that becomes very useful because we can then tell Django undo the last migration or go back 2 migrations. And Django will also protect our data so we don't like roll back a migration that might delete data. So just to chat a little bit more about what's going under the hood here with these migrations and how powerful they are. And a level up, we have our models, and those have fields now. And you can almost think about this as like, these are the pieces that make up a Django model, right? These different fields. And Django ORM gives us a lot of fields so that we don't always have to build them from scratch, right? If we wanted to build a wheel, it might need a rim and a tire. If we want to build a user, it might have an email and a first name. So there's a whole bunch of fields here. And as you all have discovered, there's null and there's blank. And the difference here is blank is about like the data that goes in to Django, especially later when we see like forms and stuff. So like we haven't seen it yet with models, but like when you're creating a model, for instance, from the Django console, if blank is false, it won't let you create a model with empty data in a field. Null is about how it gets stored in the database, and Postgres, and saying like, hey, this text field can't be null. And what this lets us do down the line is, let's say I'm creating a user profile, and I don't want to force users to give me a profile picture right away, but I want some sort of image. Well, you can use default for blank, but another way to do it would be you could set like null to false in the database, but blank to be true, and insert a default along the way. For most fields, null and blank are set to false by default, so we don't have to add them in all the time. And that's kind of good, right? In general, it's better to be strict by default. And so there's all these different kinds of fields, and you don't have to memorize them. And really the goal is, as you need them, learn about them. Like something that's good to know about this Boolean field is that I believe blank is actually set to true here. And this is in our lesson for today as well. And this is just some guidance about what to set for null and blank for each field. As a good rule of thumb, since most things are set to false by default, except for Boolean, you can leave it that way, and you should, I think, default to false and like only allow something to be null or blank for a specific reason, with personal email being a great example of that. Like that specifically, we want blank to be okay. All right, so we're gonna set that there. And we have all these different kinds of fields: characters, text fields for paragraphs, slugs for URL slugs. An email field is a text field with a little extra work to check that it's a valid email. There's CSVs, there's UUIDs, there's files, there's images, Booleans, integers, floats, decimals, duration for time again, and so on, right? Date time, and we haven't seen it yet, but soon we'll get to foreign key and all relationships between models, just like with tables. And there's even a JSON field. So there's all sorts of good stuff here. And this leads, I think, to the next bit, which is useful to talk about. And let me actually get my my guide up here as I get this up, and I bring up VS Code and close out some VS Code things. But let's talk about adding more stuff to our Pokemon model. I don't want Mokipon. I want Pokemon in the models file. I want to add more stuff to the Pokemon model. But just like with Postgres, it's really useful to have fake data. It's really useful. And in Django, and this term is not unique to Django, fake data is called fixtures, which is literally fake data. You'll often hear it referred to as mock data as well, and other things. And so we can create a directory in here. And what's going to happen is this migration tool, it's going to look at our fixtures and create data for us when we run migrations. And let's see what this looks like, in fact. And let me go ahead and put this. And let me go ahead and make this a bit smaller and make this a bit bigger so we can see what's going on in the terminal. So I'm going to create a fixtures directory inside Pokemon app, inside the Django app. Excuse me. And inside it, I'm going to create a file for our Pokemon data. And I want to call this just Pokemon data.json. And we're almost always going to create our fixture files will be JSON files, right? The JavaScript object notation. And there is a particular format that we have to follow here. We need some nested objects. And actually, I need to fix this. I apologize. It should rather look like this. Our fixtures file is going to be an array of objects. Yes, what's up? Okay, I wasn't sure if you had a question or not. So the fixture, each fixtures file, we probably almost always want it to be a JSON array. And then each object is going to represent a particular, think of it as a row that we're inserting into a table, which is pretty much what it's going to do. Except again, we don't interact directly with the SQL now. We interact with Django ORM with our models. So the first thing we have to do is give it the name. Of the model. And we also have to give it the name of the Django app, right? And this again is where consistent naming can make our life a lot easier. We are going to have to pass in the primary key column or field value. So chances are this might fail unless I drop the database. Because if I go in here and I look at all my Pokemon, well, there's already a Pokemon with ID of 1, right? I already put Pikachu in there. But for creating fixture data, fake data, it kind of makes sense to like assume the database is empty and this is the very first stuff that goes in there. And then whatever else goes in gets put on top of that. The primary key is a little special. So it's its own property on this JSON object. And then all of the different fields go in their own JSON object here. And it is the name of the field and the value. And again, the name of the field. Actually, let me go ahead and split it like this. And let's look at models. Right, we've got our Pokemon model, name, value. And that's an integer, which is okay in JSON. And then is in stable, which I need to not misspell, is going to be false. So it takes a little more work to set up the fixture data, but it becomes extremely useful. And we can use this load data command, which is a Django command to load the data from our fixture. Now, I believe we're going to see a failure here when I do this, because a Pokemon with this primary key already exists. And then I think we'll just drop the database and install it again. So we do have to use this manage PY we use for almost everything. And what is simultaneously nice and potentially a little confusing is we don't need to pass the path to this. Django will know to look in the fixtures directory, I believe. So let's give this a shot and see what happens. So it looks like it did create the thing from the fixture. Let's see what that looks like. You know, this appears to have changed, but let's do this. Let me just delete everything from the Pokemon table. And in fact, actually, this is not a good idea for me to delete it this way, because with Django, we need to be a little more careful of. I really should use the Django console actually to do that, or I should drop the whole database. So I think what I'll do is from the command line, I believe Postgres has a drop db command that I can use. And it's Pokédex DB. And often it's easier to just drop the whole database than like kind of try and modify it. Let's see here. Database Pokédex DB is being accessed by other users. That's a nice thing that Postgres does. That is almost definitely my P-SQL session. Let's try this again. And now that would appear to have worked. If I go into P-SQL and look through my databases, I do not see a Pokemon. So now let's do this again. So to reiterate, I'm going to, I shouldn't have any migrations to make, but just to be safe, I'm going to double check. And it is complaining because the database doesn't exist. And that's a good thing to remember as well, that before migrations can work, I do need a database. So let's create, let me make sure I get the name right here. Let's recreate our Pokédex DB database. And now I should be able to make migrations. No changes detected, which is good. I haven't touched a model file anytime soon. So now let's run the migration. And now we can see all the different things that it's done here. These are all the other Django apps, all their other migrations, and we can see our migrations get run. And now, if I go to my load data command, which is going to be, I'll just type it out again. And I have a typo there because I said load date instead of load data. But that seemed to run. And now we can go into P-SQL and connect to our Pokemon database. And we can select star from Pokemon, and we should see, let's see if I got the name right here. And it is easy to forget since Django actually creates the table names. Each table name has the app, the Django app underscore, and then the name of the model field. So let's select star from Pokemon app, Pokemon. And indeed, we've got Pikachu in there. So, right, it takes a little while to set up, but now that I've got this here, like I can add Charmander pretty easily. And Charmander's in there as well. And let's actually use the Django console this time. And let's do Pokemon objects all. Oh, and of course, I have to import. Let's see if I can remember this correctly. I believe it is from dot models import Pokemon. Oh, so I'm close, but not right. So I'm actually going to look up my guide code from the lesson to refresh myself on how to run the Django console. And I actually want to do from Pokemon app models, which makes a lot of sense that it has to start with the Django app name, import Pokemon. And if I do Pokemon objects all, I should get them all. And if I look at, this is a list of objects, of Pokemon objects. I've got Pikachu, I've got Charmander, and in fact, we can delete these as well. If I wanted to delete one, I believe it is, not sure off the top of my head if this is the correct command. Let's find out. And I might have to just do yeah, the delete command. I honestly I have to double check that one. That was not it. There's a little more you have to do, but we can delete stuff from the Django console as well. We can delete data. So the main thing here is fixtures, because this is pretty cool and useful. So I want to pause and check in and see what questions people have about creating this fake data that we call fixtures, and then starting to use it along with these other tools that we're learning about.
Yeah, so I'm just confused. Why were your tables already populated with Pikachu and Charmander?
Oh, from the lesson this morning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
If you remember this morning, I used let's see, I actually have to refresh myself on what the command was. It was something like what's another Pokemon?
Squirtle.
Squirtle. Thank you. This is how Pokemon ignorant I am. I ran this command in the Django console, like creating a new Pokemon name. Am I getting their name right, by the way?
It's close enough.
Close enough. All right, I'll take it.
Oh yeah, I remember now.
Yeah.
So this is just a different way to do that.
Yes, exactly. Doing it this way, it's like it's the difference between we connect to P-SQL and run an insert statement, which is basically what I do here, right? And now there's 3 in there, I think. Let's actually see. I see. Oh, I actually did delete Pikachu before. I actually did get that right. I got so confused there. Indeed, if we want to delete Squirtle, I believe I would do that. And now if I look at this, there's just one Pokemon in there now. So just like with P-SQL in the Django console, we can query, we can create, we can delete. But just like where it's really useful to have that stuff in code that we can rerun very easily as we develop and work on things, you probably want to put your fake data in a fixture file, because then if you run into an issue and you need to like blow away the database and rebuild it, you've got your fake data saved and you can create it with one command. Clarice, yes, what's up?
Is there a way to, I guess, I don't know how to say this, like save the data, but like it populates in the written JSON? Like, I don't know where it's saving these things. Like,
Right.
is it writing? Like, if I wanted to add like some data from the internet and I just pushed it through, do I have to like write everything out? Or is there a way to make it do that on its own?
I think I understand what you're saying. So let me tackle that in two parts. As to where my fixture data lives, let's see, where am I right now? So we want to go, let me get into the directory here. So now I'm in the same directory I was in VS Code with the Pokemon project and all that good stuff. And if I navigate into the Pokemon app directory, I've got this fixtures directory. And in there is this JSON file. And we would want to save this, like check it into version control, into GitHub, just like all our other source code. Really everything except that .venv directory goes into version control. And so that's how I can nicely save this fake data as I build it. And then just like, here, I'll quit VS Code. Just like with everything else with Postgres, once SQL is ran against Postgres, and remember those migration files just get turned into SQL, stuff is saved in Postgres as well. So I've got this text file, and then I've got this data in Postgres, and Postgres saves it wherever it wants to. Like wherever my computer has decided to give Postgres like hard drive space to save stuff, that's where it is. And so, you know, if I quit my computer and restarted and then opened up Postgres, regardless of whether Django is running or not, this Pokédex database is still here. I can connect to it. And the data schema is still there. And all the data is still there, right? And then just like Postgres, if I deleted all this stuff, then when I ran my Django web server program, you know, Django would probably freak out a little bit because, or just there would be no data or the database would be deleted or something. Does that, I'm not sure if that was exactly what you're asking about, so I will just want to check in.
Well, I guess like, you know how we put in the Squirtle, how can we, I guess, save that permanently to our JSON? Or do we have to type it in to make it save to our JSON?
By JSON, do you mean like this specific file,
Yeah.
Pokemon
Yeah.
data.json?
Yeah.
So right now, oh, do you sort of mean like what's the interaction between, say, the Django console and this JSON file? Like when I'm doing stuff in here, well, I forgot something. And that's why it's freaking out here. Are you asking sort of like what's the relationship between this JSON file and the Django console?
I guess for me, it's just tough to imagine that someone hand wrote out entire JSONs of all the data and didn't just like, I don't know, have a computer figure out how to do it.
Oh, I see. Well, you know, as our data gets bigger, we totally could. I mean, to be honest, I sort of did use a computer to do this. So if you noted, like I made the one, and at this point I can just copy and paste it for another. And you know, if we have like 10 to 20 things in here, this is not that difficult. If we start getting into hundreds, if I need to like create a huge amount of fake data, at that point, maybe I do want to write a Python script to create that for me. But there's a lot of ways to get data into the database and a lot of ways to generate this JSON, right? You know, like once we have real data in the database, we could dump it out in JSON format as well and use that as fake data. There's a lot of different strategies. This JSON file, you know, once I've written it, I check it into version control, I push it up to GitHub, and that's saved. So, you know, fixture data is like fake data for testing, basically, and development. And there's a lot of different strategies to generate that. To be honest, you could use Chat GPT if you gave it a couple of these examples.
Well, I think Megan might have hit what I was looking at or what I was thinking about.
Oh, I see. If you want to get stuff out of Postgres. Yeah, you can totally do that as well. I mean, it would really, and let me see, am I in the console right now? Yeah, I feel like I'm not quite in the right spot with this interactive console. Yeah, I'm not sure what I did, but there's something wonky about my Django console at the moment. So Megan, you are totally correct. I could run, let's see, what is the command that we put in here? Python manage py, dump data. Let's borrow some of this. I could run this command that dumps out the data that currently exists in the database. And then save that to a file. If this data comes from my fixture file to begin with, there's not much point in doing that. If there's data in there that got in there some other way, then that might be useful. But the question would be, I guess, why? Sort of because development is a little different, but the whole point of a database is once the data is in there, it sort of securely stores it. So there's a bunch of ways to get data in and out. And there's a bunch of ways to generate these fixture fields. I think it all comes down to the specifics of what am I trying to accomplish? Am I creating fake data from nothing? Do I want to get data that real users have put in and spit it out as a JSON file to create fake data with? It just depends on what we are trying to do. I don't know if that helps or not, or if that's a bit too much information all at once.
It helps.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. And thank you for the clarification, Megan. That kind of helps me understand the question a lot better. Let's add some extra fields to this Pokemon model and see what happens. And I think I'm just going to full screen this so that I think it's a little easier for us to see, because there's a little bit here more I want to show. And then there's one thing in particular with models that is really good for us to see that I do want to get to. So I do want to add, let's add a date encountered for our Pokemon. And Django does have a date field. And we're going to give it just some default value that is way in the past. Let's give a date captured for our Pokemon, which will be another date field. And this is going to have a default 2. I do have to actually import something. Django has a bunch of utility methods to make common tasks easier. And one of those is dealing with date and time. And so there is a time zone function or class actually from Django that we can use. So this way, when I create a new Pokemon, I don't have to put in a specific date captured. Just by default, if I leave that empty, it will always be whatever the current time is in whatever time zone our Django web server is set to use, right? Which again, time zones, once you start dealing with real data, start to get a little tricky. Let's give our Pokemon a description. And let's use a text field, which lets you have way more than 255 characters. Think of whole paragraphs or more. And it is nice to add a default value so that I don't have to stick data in. For instance, let's take a look at my fixture data for Pikachu, and I really need to change this person's name to Charmander, his Pokemon's name. For Pikachu and Charmander, and I need to change this back to 2. If I didn't have default values for all of these, I would also have to update this fixture file. Or else Django would probably complain and throw some sort of error. And then I guess captured is the same as is unstable. So you know what? Let's I think Django is gonna maybe complain a little bit if we get rid of is unstable. But we'll add captured. Actually, let's rename this since it's pretty much the same thing, and we'll rename it to captured, and let's watch what happens. And here I am going to make a change to my fixture file because I have changed this field name. And so I do think it should look like this.
Hey Adam, just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
That date field, or yeah, the date field that relies on the date that the Django knows about, right? Which is in our settings project file, where we have to specify like the time zone.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe I'm sure it's time zone in here. Yeah, so by default, the time zone is set to UTC, which is, I always have to look it up, but this is sort of some more universal time zone.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And honestly, you probably almost never want to use the Django time zone. Though you might. That's not actually not true. You just, once you start dealing with time zones for real, you have to be careful. Because at some point you will need to convert to or from whatever time zone the user is in. But that is a little out of scope of what we're looking at right now. And so now that I've changed this model and updated this migration, let me go ahead and, or rather I've updated these models. Oh, I know why everything was going wrong. I did not have my virtual environment turned on in this terminal. I had it turned on maybe in one of these other ones, but probably not because I exited VS Code. So that is a common gotcha. Like if you close out your VS Code or switch from one terminal to another, the virtual environment is only on or off in the shell that you ran to activate script. Like for example, my virtual environment is turned on in that shell, but not in this shell. So that is actually really useful to know. And notice that Django notices if, say, something is changed in a way that could be destructive, and is asking for confirmation and is saying, hey, did I rename this is unstable field to captured? And yes, I did. And now Django has made a bunch of migrations. And in fact, just for fun, we can take a look at this most recent migration over here, and we can see a bunch of things. Note that Django does not change the previous migration. When we run the migrations, if we ran them from the top, it would still name the field is unstable. And then when it gets to this migration number 4, then it renames it. Right? So one migration after the other on top of each other. And we've got our new fields here and stuff. And let's go ahead and let's run these migrations. And it went ahead and ran them. And let's, I think the fixture data is already in there, but let's load it again just for fun. And here, interestingly, I get an error. And the error is because I did not include manage.py right here. So let's go ahead and do that. And now that's done. And let's just quickly, let's actually pop into the Django console to confirm that all of my Pokemon are where they should be. I'm just gonna go up, there we go. I need this import statement. Let's find the one where I get all the Pokemon. And let's just do all poking, and there should be 2. Lo and behold, there are. And the first one is Pikachu, and the second one is Charmander. So I'm looking good. And the last thing I want to show you all, and actually let me pause here to see what questions people have.
Did you have to do something to connect the fixtures, or did that happen automatically?
You mean, when you say connect, do you mean get the data from this JSON file into Postgres?
Yeah, was there something you had to do other than the load data command? Was there some other way you had to connect your model or your Postgres to that fixtures file?
Great question. I need to put this fixtures directory inside the app where those models live, so Django knows where to find it. I need to put the file inside that fixtures directory, and it needs to be a JSON file. And then in here, I need to tell Django what model does Django use to create these things. And I give it the name of the Django app and of the model. And then once I do this, this is a different format, but this is essentially the data that goes into Postgres, right? But we give Django the data for the model fields, and Django does the work of turning it into SQL. So just like with Postgres, once you like create a foreign key, Postgres knows about that relationship between tables. Django knows about what a model is, the shape of it, and how to take a model and turn it into like data to stick into Postgres. It actually will generate like SQL to do all that work. And then we run that load data command. But of course, we have to run our migrations first so that the tables exist in Postgres at all.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I'd made a mistake on my model part.
Got it. Yeah, no, great question. So the last thing I want to show, and the really cool thing, is this Pokemon class. Yes, it inherits from this cool fancy model class that Django gives us, but this is still a normal Python class, and we can write all the same sorts of methods we would on any other model. For instance, it'd be nice to get information about our Pokemon a little more easily. So let's do an F string that prints out the name of me, who I am as a Pokemon. And if I've been captured or not. Right, and if I wanted to, I could even break that into a separate message or something, but this is actually pretty nice. And now if I go into the Django shell and I do my little dance, and again, this is where I really think starting to write down a cheat sheet for yourself in a file becomes really useful, or just getting used to using the up arrow a lot like I do. Just like with the dunder string with other objects in Python, we can use our dunder string here too. And I can add more stuff. Like for instance, what would be really useful is being able to capture a Pokemon. And this is kind of cool because now we can give our model a method that updates its own data in Postgres. Right? If it's caught, we'll flip it to not caught. If it's not caught, we'll flip it to caught. And then we do have to use the save command because with Django models, save is what tells Django, all right, generate SQL, write, save our model, take this data, turn it into the columns for the correct table and put it in Postgres. And in fact, let's add one more method here for a Pokemon to level up. And let's do the same thing. And this is where models get really cool because again, we've got data and logic interacting, but this time we can save the data in Postgres, which is awesome. And I do need to fix my typo over here. So the one thing I do need to do, like I can do Pikachu equals all Poke sub-0. I can get my Pikachu info. I'm pretty sure this level up doesn't exist because this shell session that I'm running doesn't know about the change I made to the model file. I don't think I need a migration for this because none of this actually affects the database, right? This is just methods we would call that would maybe let us like change the values, but the Pokemon has the exact same columns in the database it would still have. So I think what I can do is just do that. Though what's probably safe is just to quit and re-enter the shell. And let's just do Pikachu equals all Poke sub-0. There's Pikachu. And now let's see if Pikachu can level up. No, he has no attribute level up. So maybe I do have to exit and re-enter the shell. I don't think I have to run migrations, but we'll see in a moment. So don't quote me on that. Let's see what happens now. There we go. Pikachu's level is 13. Let's level them up again. Pikachu level is now 14. Pikachu is just growing and growing. And if I go into pSQL, Pikachu's level is 14, right? And the important thing here to remember is I need to use this .save method call when I'm making changes to a model to save that change to the database, right? And this is the object mapping. We store information as an object. Django maps it into tables and columns in Postgres, which is super cool. And I just want to pause to see if folks have any questions here.
Yeah. So let's say you wanted to remove one of your Pokemon from your table.
Mhm.
Can you do that without recreating your whole database?
Absolutely. The best way to do that is going to be from the Django console here. You could do it in Postgres, but since, especially once we start adding more and more relationships between models and tables, we've seen, there's a pretty tight correspondence between the models, but it's not one-to-one. And with Django models, we can create like some steps that happen when you delete things, say. In general, now that we're doing stuff the Django way, you want to do it the Django way So that we don't miss some sort of setup or teardown step that Django is doing under the hood. So Django models can do all sorts of amazing stuff. And one of them is there is a delete method you can call on really any instance of a Django model. And I'm going to poke around to see if I can't find the example. It looks like they use a remove command. It looks like there's a clear method as well. There's a lot of things that are synonymous, and there should be a delete somewhere around here as well. There's delete. So it's worth a little time just reading through save and delete. And the thing to remember here is like Pikachu is an instance of a Django model, right? Our Pokemon class inherits from this model class, so it gets all this stuff. So I can use this delete method. I'm curious what the remove one does. Yeah, so the differences get a little more subtle between like remove and delete. For our purposes, we can just use delete for now. We can even customize this, but we can just call delete. It does give us this note, the Python instance will still exist and have data in its fields. So we would have to like delete Pikachu from our running Python program as well. But the important thing is getting rid of it from the database. So I can do Pikachu.delete. And now if I go into pSQL and I poke around, Pikachu's gone. And in fact, I think it's still stored in memory. Let's see what happens if we do Pikachu.remove. Right, and it's, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the deal is there, but the important thing is Pikachu has been deleted from Postgres. So that's actually like our source of truth for everything. Once I exit this console, Pikachu will be gone forever. So now Pikachu is gone. And I either have to, run the command like to inside the console to create Pikachu again, or I could rerun the fixtures load data command to recreate Pikachu from here, or however else I want to get Pikachu in the database. Yeah, great question, Andrew. What other
Yeah,
questions
thank
do
you.
people have? Okay, cool. I think so this was the big thing. These methods on models are extremely powerful as we build out our web app, and we can put all sorts of great business logic here. There's one more thing I want to show with Django. And something pretty cool that it gives us. And this is the Django admin site. And so what I'm going to do is inside this Pokemon app directory, there's already a file created named admin. I'm going to import the model, and I'll show you what this does in a sec. Basically, Django gives us some very nice stuff for free. We're going to import our Pokemon model. And let's see what this is. Oh, it's complaining because it's unused. And now we have to tell Django this admin site Django app that comes with Django. We have to tell it, all right, admin site, I want you to register the Pokemon model because we are going to use it. Let's see what that squiggly is. Oh, it's just missing a module dot string. And we can do something very nifty with this now that we've done this. There's a little bit more we have to do here for the admin site to be set up. We have to create a super user for our database. You can put whatever you want in here for the email, doesn't really matter. And I'm just typing password. And I highly recommend, oh, it doesn't. Yeah, I just recommend for development, don't worry about admin password validation or any of this stuff because this is all running on our local machines. And the reason we need to do this is because Django has this very powerful admin site feature that we'll see in just a moment. But it only wants to let users with admin accounts or super admin accounts, super users, have access. So we're going to run the Django server, which is going to open up on the same port it always does, port 8000 on our local host port. And then we do want to go somewhere slightly different. You want to go to /admin. And lo and behold, Adam C. Leave my password as password. I'm not even going to worry about it. And we'll learn how to use Django to do all this stuff. We'll actually use React for our front end with Django. This is using, it's something called Django templates that basically lets you sort of combine HTML and Python code, which is cool for some things, but has become a more outdated approach. Though it has its uses, and this is a good example. If I want to add users, we'll learn later how to hook into Django's authentication. We can do that, but more usefully, I can manage this stuff in here. So for example, if you were, managing a bunch of blogs or the New York Times site, instead of Pokemon, you might have articles. And if you're the editor, you might want to be able to change an article's status to publish is true. And then the web app can show it on the front page of the New York Times or whatever. And we can delete Pokemon and we can add Pokemon. And Django generates all of this stuff based on that model class that we created, which is how it knows how to do all this and why we need to use those model fields. And this is a good example of what should and shouldn't be blank. And now we can create Squirtle. I don't know anything about Pokemon. And we can save, and Squirtle is there. And if I go to, and in fact, now that the server is running, you can see all the kind of GET requests and stuff happening. And if I go to the Pokédex, I can see Squirtle in the database. If I go to the Django console, I can see Squirtle in there as well. And that's one of the why we call Django a batteries included web framework. Because you got to do all this setup, but the batteries are included. So yeah, I know this ran a bit long, so thank you all very much for sticking with it through this afternoon. I definitely want to give you all a bit of work time before stand down to dive into these assignments. And in fact, let me just very briefly talk about them. So you guys have seen this one, and the next assignment really builds on this. You are going to add some methods to that student model. And then we are going to, let's see, what are we doing here? I'm pretty sure what we are doing here is, yeah, creating a new Django project just to practice these steps, the virtual environment and everything. And we've given a rough sketch of a database schema here. And I think you all can figure out the relationships between these things now. And the relationships, in fact, we're really getting to tomorrow. So don't worry about how to do prompt foreign keys with Django models. We're going to see more of that tomorrow, that you can poke ahead a bit if you want. But just create a bunch of models. Create a model for each of these tables with all of these different properties. And same thing here with the video store. And we will start building up on this throughout the week as we go. So I think it'll be really good practice. There should be plenty of room to play with stuff, but also enough guidance to get going. And Clarice, yes, what's up?
I guess not to add more things, but should we also do inheritance type things? Because I know the animals probably share a lot of attributes.
Oh, great question. I honestly would recommend against that. You absolutely can. I would say maybe once you have this working the non-inheritance way, try it the inherited way. I kind of tend to avoid a lot. Well, first of all, a lot of my professional work has been with JavaScript and React where there isn't a lot of inheritance. And even when I did professional work with Ruby on Rails, which is really similar to Django, there was some inheritance that happened. You want to be a little careful because it can get confusing really fast. And then, changing can start to be a little trickier because if there's some mammal class that inherits, then you change that and everything else changes, which has a plus and a minus. I would recommend not doing inheritance and doing each of these separately. And the more you kind of do real world engineering, the more you find that some duplication of code is actually preferred because it lets you change stuff without them affecting each other. That said, you are absolutely right that there's overlap and we could create like a common animal class or something to inherit from. And if you want to do that, that would be an awesome exercise. I would just, if I was doing this, I would do each of these. Like copying and pasting is actually not the worst thing, especially if it's our own code. I would build out 4 of these, get these 4 working, and then try the inheritance approach. I don't think there will be any gotchas with the Django models. I think, now that we've created this Pokemon class, for example, if I want to do class like, I don't know, specialized Pokemon inherits Pokemon, I think that should work just fine. And then that inherits from the models.model class. But don't quote me on that. And like certain things with like super in the class constructor to make sure that, this model class has some sort of init method. And we need to make sure that if we have like these 3 layers of inheritance, where specialized Pokemon inherits from Pokemon, which inherits from models, we might need to do something like this off the top of my head. You would just have to check basically all the parents constructor in it. Because we have to make sure that whatever the initializer for this models class gets run. So there may or may not be 1 or 2 things like that that pop up along the way, which is the only reason I'd recommend doing that as like an iteration. Also on a practical level, like 3 is not so bad. Like once we start getting closer to like 5 or 10, then the value of inheritance versus the trade-off starts to become a bit stronger, I think. But yeah, I've kind of gone on about that enough, I think, and that would probably be good practice to do if you're interested, but it's not required. And that is a really good point, by the way. Thank you for raising that and asking about that. What other questions do people have? Or things maybe you'd like to see me go over again? Josh, yes, sir.
Yeah, could you just remind us when we need to make migrations for new changes? You said like for your methods, you didn't really have to migrate them, or did you?
You don't. That said, if for now just running the make migrations command every time you change a model, including methods, if that's easier, that is totally fine. It won't hurt anything. To reiterate, let me I'll create yet another console here. And you may find you'll want to create more and more terminals or do like terminal splits or something. but if I do Python manage.py, make migrations. If there's no change needed, Django figures that out and just says no changes detected. So you can run this till the cows come home. And remember that this command does not actually change the Postgres database. It just creates the migration files. I believe there's also there are a couple useful things here with the migrate command. Here we go, plan. If I pass the plan flag to migrate, it doesn't run anything, but it'll tell me what migrations need to be run. So if you're ever not sure, you can use that as well to check. But short answer is these don't affect our data model, right? No new columns need to be created on the Pikachu table. This is all about working with the data that's already there. And that's why we don't need to run migrations. Whenever you add or change a field to a model, that's when you need to create a new migration and run it against the database. So whenever you change or add a field to a model or create a brand new model, that's when you need to create migrations and run them against the database. And we have one or two cheat sheets floating around, and I will dig them up and send them all of yours way. But again, I recommend starting to put some together and maybe even like a class Django cheat sheet. So I think people generally find that helpful. Yeah, good question as well. And what other questions do people have or things would you all like me to go over? Okay, awesome.